It'd be good to get Chuck's opinion on this. We are pleased and honored to have, for my money, the best political consultant and political mind in the entire state of Arizona, one of the great political consultants in the country. That's Chuck Coughlin, president of HighGround Public Affairs. Chuck, happy Father's Day.
Hey, happy Father's Day to you and all your listeners out there, Seth. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Before we get to some of what I wanted to ask you, Chuck, let's just follow up on what that previous caller said. Am I right, or is someone else right? Is there somewhere in between? My sense is that the leadership has been pretty good. At least our delegation has been, and even John Boehner, actually, I think gets too much of a bum rap.
Yeah, it's the old notion of the media will cover the one over the many, and when you're an executive, you have the executive, whether you're a governor or whether you're the president, you command the microphone. When you, my old saying when I learned working with many governors out here is when what you say and what you do drops anchor, and everybody else will follow that. And so it's very difficult for a speaker to respond on this issue. But let me just talk to that issue. The issue that the president acted upon on Friday, I'm sure he's tested it. I'm sure he knows it's a winner, obviously, with his base. And it's a winner I know it's a winner with independent voters. I've tested these type of messages even out here in Arizona in a general electorate. And the notion of giving people an opportunity to work without a path to citizenship, but an opportunity to work is one of these issues that polls pretty well in many, many places. I actually tested it in District 9 and the new 9 down there, because it'll be one of these issues that is a swing issue in this upcoming general election. And so the president knew what he was doing. And, my complaint, sort of along with what your caller was saying, was I would rather have had everybody just go right back at the president, seemed to be the Friday knee-jerk reaction, was to go back and say, I'd be willing to work with him on this issue, call him on the fact that as an executive order it's not an appropriate thing to do, but give him this, but then ask for 3 or 4 other things, like the elimination of extended family immigration, perhaps some border issues, perhaps some attention on what's happening. You have the 3 presidential candidates in Mexico that have all voluntarily said they're not going to pursue the drug war the way the current administration has. So where are we going as a country? And I think there was an opportunity that a lot of Republicans missed this past week with trying to get to find some middle ground here.
We are talking to Chuck Coughlin. Chuck, you set a great table. This was a short segment. I'm going to keep you, Tom, and I'd like to keep you for a longer segment at the end of this, on the other side of this break, if that's okay. I want to delve a little more deeply into everything you just said, the politics in Arizona, the politics nationally, the situation in Mexico, because I think it's something we in Arizona need to spend a lot more time thinking and talking about. So we'll be right back with Chuck Coughlin from HighGround Public Affairs here on Arizona Politics and Culture.
Father's Day, June 17th, 2012. This is Arizona Politics and Culture on 960 The Patriot. I know you've been waiting for it. You've been sitting there waiting to dial. 602-508-0960. I have a pair of VIP tickets to Supreme Decisions this Thursday night with Hugh Hewitt and the Smart Guys at the venue in Scottsdale. And that also includes a pair of tickets to Adam Carolla and Dennis Prager as well. 602-508-0960. Caller number 2 right now at 602-508-0960.
We are also talking with Chuck Coughlin, the president of HighGround Public Affairs, I think one of the smartest political brains in the country, and luckily for us here in Arizona. Chuck, you had mentioned a lot of interesting issues that are on the plate coming up for November here that affect Arizona, kind of a national microscope on Arizona, having to do with issues from immigration to our border with Mexico. Could you say another word or two about the elections coming up in Mexico before we get back to our elections? Because I'm with you. I don't think we're paying enough attention to our neighbor here on the south.
No, it's an incredibly, I appreciate the opportunity. It's an incredibly important election for Arizona. I mean, if you believe that, well, it is, it's fact, Mexico's Arizona's largest trading partner, and one of the problems with our economy out here is the fact that Mexico is in a state of turmoil and has been for some time. I believe the Calderon administration, for as many things that I can fault it on, but I can also give it a great deal of credit for having the courage to take on the drug cartels and the drug war in Mexico. And this is the first presidential administration in Mexico that's inserted the military into that discussion. The very same kind of thing that happened in Colombia that the Colombians stuck with and finally stabilized their government in Colombia. And now we have three candidates running for the presidency of Mexico, all of which have said we'll walk away from what Calderon's commitment's been. And this administration and the Obama administration has not said a word about that. Has not said anything about it. Has not implored any of those candidates down there. It's as if that's what they want as well. They want, a soft peddling of the relationship with the cartel here, and or the cartels, and that's just not in Arizona's best interest. It is not in Arizona's best interest to allow to permit Mexico to continue in this lawlessness and to regress back to where it's come from.
Well, Chuck, you and I hadn't really talked much about our points of view on this before this, but mine is exactly what you just said. Mexico is not now, and they would resent being called a failed state, but they very easily could be. As you said, they are teetering, and I think a lot of it has to do with the strong-armed taking on of the cartels that Calderon has been very brave on, and has taken a page from what the Colombians finally had to wake up to and do. By the way, with the assistance of the United States of America, there are some great stories about that. People should read Killing Pablo, actually. It's a pretty good Mark Bowden book about how we helped. Colombia says some things we did, some things it doesn't talk about that we did. But we had an active role in that, and Colombians thank us to this day for standing strong with them and taking on the drug cartels. Mexico's are going to grow stronger if they are given the message that leadership, both in Mexico and in this country, is going to grow weaker against them. Nature may abhor a vacuum, but drug dealers, drug smugglers, drug cartels thrive in vacuums. That's where they live. Well, and it's going to be bad for Arizona. It's going to be bad for our children, and it's going to be disastrous as we see more lax drug policy is coming down from both the federal government and from some of the things Arizonans are voted for. For example, this medical marijuana thing, which I happen to think is going to be a sluice for drug use. But anyway, I think the Mexico thing is a big deal.
Well, I had a story. It's just an anecdotal story, but it's an important story from a gentleman who's head of a Fortune 500 company here in Arizona who had the opportunity to grow his business in Mexico, opportunity to have multiple store locations open up. Went to Mexico City, visited with the people that were there, and it was a co-location, a co-branding opportunity on a real estate opportunity with a retail provider. I don't want to say who it was because I've never asked his permission, but went down and talked to this person and said there's 30 locations they could have, but he admitted, the Mexican authority admitted that he could only have access, feel secure in about 4 of those locations.
Yeah.
And he said, I said, what are you going to do? And he goes, I'm going to come home. I'm going to open up one more store in New Hampshire. Well, that's bad for Arizona. I mean, that's terrible for Arizona from an economic perspective when we could be, by insisting on the rule of law as Senator Pierce did with 1070, insisting that the federal government support a rule of law. That's what we should be doing with the Calderon administration. That's what they've been attempting to do, and we're backing away from it. And we're literally waving the white flag, and the Mexican, all three candidates for the presidency are waving it too. And that's just a terrible, terrible statement to be making, and it's a sign of the times that things aren't going in the right direction.
No, and it's a sign of surrender too. People like to use these mantras. I think you and I and Tom and we're all in the business of working with conventional wisdom. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it isn't. One of the things conventional wisdom loves to say, and just say without seeming contradiction, and it's eminently wrong, is that you cannot win these things. You cannot win the fight against you cannot win the war against drugs. You absolutely can. Look at Colombia. They did it. Medellin, of all places, is now a vacation destination, if you can imagine it. It can be done. And my fear is that we're going to draw all the wrong lessons and absorb these mantras that are not true in basis of fact. And Mexico is going to become a failed society, and Arizona will pay the price.
And then we will deal with the real refugee crisis at that point. I mean, that's really what we've been dealing with anyways. This has not been it's not really an immigration issue. It's really a foreign policy issue disguised as an immigration issue because of the economic stresses that are put on the people in Mexico. They don't democratize their own economies down there. They don't democratize their industries. They're state-owned, state-run, and there is no viable middle class. And so, we get what we bargained for, and we're creating the refugee crisis, and is exactly what we're bargaining for.
Yep, and it's
and I've implored Mexican or Hispanic leadership in this country to stand up, and it's one of the amazing things in this country to see Hispanic leadership wither at that argument. They won't stand up and make that argument. They won't stand up and criticize Mexico, and that's where most of that. I mean, that to me is dumbfounding. That they, on behalf of the heritage and the people that they the heritage that they come from, aren't asking to hold that administration accountable for all the people, all the relatives, all the people that they know. Hold their own people accountable to a standard which would lift all boats down there, but they don't.
We're talking to Chuck Coughlin. He is the president of HighGround Public Affairs here in Arizona, one of the nation's great political analysts and political consultants. Chuck, why don't they? Is it just an emotional reaction not to criticize the home country, or is it some kind of fear or misplaced empathy? Why won't they stand up for this issue?
Well, I've had a conversation with a lot of people I respect, and the good, strong Hispanic leaders here in this state. And one of the things that I've observed is that it's a cultural thing. You do not step out of line. You do not step out of line and end up creating criticisms of your own administration, of people you're familiar with. Most Hispanic leadership, I call it gateway leadership. I know this person, and I can introduce you to this person, and then they'll introduce you to this person. And that gateway leadership model doesn't work when you criticize those people that you're trying to introduce people to. So there is not an honest dialogue. There's not an honest dialogue. There isn't leadership to say, it's wrong, it's broken. It's a sign of an unhealthy political party when there isn't tension within the party where you create criticisms of yourself. I mean, that's a good thing to have healthy primaries, strong primaries, have these types of discussions. But you don't see that on that side of the street, and you just do not see that.
Well, hopefully this can be the beginning of some more dialogue on it, because I think it's crucially important. Can I use that point, though, to pivot to the kind of healthy primaries we are having in Arizona and get your take on some of those? I think the finest man in public office today is retiring. That's John Kyle. There's a battle royale for his seat on the Republican side, and at the same time, there looks to be what looks to be like a fairly strong Democratic opponent in the wings waiting to challenge whoever that Republican is. A few words from you, Chuck, on how you're seeing both sides of that race?
Yeah, Congressman Flake has not run statewide before. He's been fairly narrowly defined as a fiscally, very fiscal conservative. His issue is the earmarks and raising that banner and being known for that issue. But he's really never run statewide before, and he doesn't have a reputation beyond really his district. I think he's well regarded by many people in Washington for his principled stand against pork and his principled stand on budgetary issues. But traditional Arizona political leadership has, such as the one you just mentioned, John Kyle, has a record of engaging on important public policy issues to Arizona. Some of them aren't very sexy, but they're hugely important, from water rights settlements to land. Only 13% of our state is privately owned. So from water rights settlements to land deals with the federal government, Senator Kyle's been sort of the go-to guy in the Arizona administration to be able to fix problems in Washington. And if you look at the history of Arizona, this is my opinion, you look at the history of Arizona, one of the reasons we have been very successful, or one of the reasons we're here as a state, one of the principal reasons is that we've had a successful relationship with the federal government from the very beginning of statehood, from the dams to the water reclamation projects to the CAP to the military bases. One could legitimately argue that Arizona is a creation of the federal government by virtue of the infrastructure that was invested out here that I just mentioned. And that's an important role for Arizona congressmen to live up to. And Jeff is not, that's not been Jeff's role. And so I think many people in the business community, many people in Arizona are concerned that we're losing that type of leadership. Will Cardin has presented himself as an alternative that could represent that type of leadership, and obviously he's pretty well self-funded right now, and he's making a criticism, he's making a play against Congressman Flake. I think it will be it is a competitive primary, but undoubtedly in my mind, whoever wins that primary, it's absolutely essential that we elect them to be the next U.S. Senator. Mr. Carmona, I think you mentioned him, was a Surgeon General in the Bush administration, not very popular within the Bush administration, not a team player, an emergency room physician. I don't say that in a derogatory sense, because an emergency room physician is a guy who has to come in and take charge and say, I don't care what this person or that person says, I'm going to go save this person's life. That doesn't work often well with politics, and you tend to have large, wrought egos, and I've had an opportunity to meet Mr. Carmona a couple times, and I just don't think from a political perspective, I don't see his type of character surviving in a political environment. Again, he's never run for political office before, and I think either Congressman Flake or Will Cardin will be more of a match than Mr. Carmona will ever be able to handle.
Chuck Coughlin, I just can't thank you enough for joining us. I hope you'll come back.
Seth, thanks for having me on Father's Day, and wish, again, to you and to all your listeners out there, a very happy Father's Day. I hope everybody had a great one.
Happy Father's Day, Chuck. It's giving one's all from the break of day to its end, on the job, in the house, but most of all in the heart. That's what Ronald Reagan said about fathers. Tom?
Congratulations to Michael in Sunny Slope. He won the pair of tickets we had, VIP tickets for Supreme Decisions. We've got more to talk about, but we're out of time for this week. So join us next week for Arizona Politics and Culture, the place for intelligent dialogue in the Valley. If you'd like to send us an email, apcpatriot@gmail.com.